Minister, on the 6th of March as well, you know, the personal injury guidelines were adopted by the Judicial Council and they came into force on the 24th of April, over 6 months ago now. I raised this issue with you on the 31st of March and I'm doing so again because it's important for motorists, for businesses and for our community sector. The reductions in rewards that we see from those guidelines are not being passed on to consumers in full. I think there's enough evidence to prove that. Some of them are being pocketed by the industry. So will the Minister end the delay and support my bill, the Judicial Council Amendment Bill, that would hold this industry to account?
The adoption of the new personal injury guidelines by the Judicial Council and their subsequent commencement in April this year is a significant achievement, and I will put on the record it's achieved 8 months ahead of the schedule as originally intended. These new guidelines should provide much more and greater transparency around the ward levels, in addition to reducing payouts for many common injuries, and also leading to lower legal fees by encouraging greater use of the Personal Injuries Assessment Board to settle claims. Accordingly, this should lead to a reduction in claims costs for insurers, lead to shorter settlement time for claimants, and importantly help to attract new entrants into the Irish market or encourage providers who previously exited from the market to return again. Work has been undertaken by the Office to promote competition in the insurance market with IDA Ireland, and this will seek to leverage support in this area. As the Deputy will appreciate, consistent implementation of these guidelines by insurers, PIAB and the Judiciary will be vital in achieving the improved claims environment. These are early days in relation to assessing the impact of the guidelines. However, as the insurance reform agenda progresses, we will continue to seek that the industry meet their commitments to reflect savings from the guidelines and other elements of the ambitious reform agenda for customers. In my ongoing engagement with the sector, I have emphasised the need for insurance providers to reduce premiums and increase their risk appetite to provide cover in new areas. I am meeting with the main insurers again this month. These meetings are commencing next Monday on a one-by-one basis to assess their response to the guidelines. They've had sufficient time to have a concrete response to the guidelines at this stage, and to emphasise the importance of insurers when settling claims that they do not undermine the guidelines by settling for amounts which are inconsistent with the new guidelines. Another valuable tool that the Government has is holding insurance to account is the commitments in the National Claims Information Database, which allows us to monitor both claims costs and pending trends. To date, the database has published 2 comprehensive reports in the private motor insurance sector and 1 in employer and public liability insurance. These reports also include data on legal costs, settlement channels and all the other elements that impact on the overall cost of insurance premiums.
Minister, you talked about its early days. It's 6 months and more since these guidelines were in force, and these guidelines, as we see from PIAB, have reduced the average awards by 40%. That's reduced the cost of claims for the insurance industry. Now, these guidelines were not passed, and this legislation was not passed by all of the parties in this House to boost the profit of the insurance companies, and that's exactly what's happening. It was passed to reduce premiums for insurance costs for consumers, and they are not being passed on in full, and we've ample time. We've seen a study by the Alliance for Insurance Reform. They've looked at this. They've looked at hundreds of different cases, and they've said that both businesses and community groups have seen, on average, an increase of 15% since the guidelines came into effect. And similarly, we're not seeing the same type of reduction that should be happening in terms of car insurance. So, look, call a spade a spade. Insurance companies are pocketing some of the reductions now as a result of these guidelines. You can meet with them over and over again. You can have tea or coffee with them. That's fine. You will never know what they should be charging unless you actually implement the legislation that I have. And I ask you, Minister, hand on heart, why in utter God are you stalling this legislation? Surely we all want the right thing, but why is it? Is it just because it's me that it's got my name to this legislation? This is the right thing to do for consumers and business. There's a company in Dundalk about to go bust because they can't get insurance, and there's many other like them.
Minister. Okay, it's been a number of months, and the first thing I want to put on public record is there has been a decline in the cost of motor insurance premiums. That's published by the Central Statistics Office. They produce these figures on an ongoing basis, and insurance is reduced by at least 20% in the last number of years alone, and that has continued right up to the present quarter. The PIAB early indications are reductions up to 40%, and that will have a proportionate reduction in the overall costs making up your premium, which will lead to a reduction in premiums. And the other point I do want to mention, you did say there are some increases in relation to business and other insurances. In some particular sectors, there are individual local problems. Could be got to do with the high risk or maybe a lack of competition due to Brexit, but it is only in a certain amount of sectors. And I'm personally meeting with Insurance Ireland and the Alliance for Insurance Reform in the coming days to discuss the particular sections of industry that have a problem, which is generally not affecting the vast majority of businesses.
See, Minister, this is where I can't understand, because you say that you're going to take action against the government. Indeed, the Taoiseach talked about, over a year and a half ago before an election, saying that he was given 6 months to the insurance industry and that was it, or the stick would come out. Now, we did our job here. The insurance industry came before a committee, says we will reduce premiums across the board by 40%, and if not, you need to, 15 to 20%, and if not, you need to be asking us tough questions. We did our job. The Judicial Council did their job. Wards have gone down, we all accept that, but the premiums haven't. Now, this is the time to bring out the big stick. There is legislation before this House that has passed second stage. You are stalling it. This is ridiculous. This legislation is in force in Britain. It is about keeping the exact same companies to account. There is no way that I would ever know, or you would ever know, or anybody in this House will ever know what premium should be unless we collect the type of information in that. So can I ask you, stop stalling the legislation. It should be before the House next week. And can I ask you, what are you doing on the duty of care? I mentioned the company in Dundalk. Awards are coming down, but we need to deal with the duty of care. And there's been promises after promises. Now, when are we going to see the legislation?
I want to take this opportunity to say to the Deputy, last week we sought, the Department of Finance sought agreement from the Oireachtas Finance and Public Expenditure Committee for pre-legislative scrutiny in respect of the miscellaneous insurance bill that we published. I'm asking you tomorrow to set an early timescale so we can do this, because if you don't do this, if this doesn't happen before Christmas, and it will eliminate issues like the loyalty penalty that's there for home insurers and motor insurers, people who have been insured.
Misleading the Dáil. It does nothing of the sort. It asks the Central Bank for a report on what it's doing. He's completely and utterly misleading the Dáil. Your legislation does nothing.
There is pre-legislative scrutiny request at the committee. You have agreed to do it. I'm asking you to give that an urgent attention so we can deal with it promptly, because the duty care legislation will be going through the Justice Committee, not through the Finance Committee. This is one piece going through the Finance and Public Expenditure, and I would welcome the opportunity to begin with you doing that pre-legislative scrutiny in the immediate days or weeks ahead.
Does nothing. The only power it gives you is to ask for a report from the Central Bank. You can phone the Governor and do the same thing.
Deputy Dennis.